It's all about fish, isn't it, with Jesus? Fish and loaves. But bacon does not get a kind of a healthy, kind of egalitarian looking.
Afternoon. You're mute. It's the eternal question.
Yeah, you always know you're dealing with a technical genius with me, Paul. How's Greg?
Let's ask him.
You all right, Greg?
Hello.
Hello.
You all right, Greg? I thought you were going to put a fist through the screen then.
Yeah, I like to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, I know. I'm listening to you, Greg, but I'm just I forgot to position this laptop correctly, so I'm now doing it. So this is going to make it really difficult for you in the edit, because now it's going to be like one of those, when you're watching an episode of Corrie or something that's been really badly edited, and someone's talking to someone at the bar and they've got a full pint, and then it cuts for like 1 second to the other side of the bar and comes back to them, and there's like nothing left in the pint. And it's, you're kind of thinking it is possible that they could have just necked the whole pint, but
yeah,
I've met Saul, so
that's a serious set of vinyl you've got behind you, Paul. I think Fliss from the Gales posted a interview that Stuart Lee did.
Oh yeah,
about the King Rocker film, and she put something like, "See if you can spot, identify any of the CDs in the background," and it was more CDs, but it looked like he had a whole room full of, stuff.
It's not real. It's just one of those backdrops. One of those backdrops.
Right. So what do we?
What we got? I've just basically scrawled some shite in a notepad, and we'll see where it takes us.
Cool.
So
let's go.
Gentlemen. So both of you, to those in the know, have had fairly fluid membership in your musical endeavours, being the Courtesy Group and Fauxchisels.
Yeah.
First of all, I'll start with the Courtesy Group. You do appear to have settled members' availability pending on a formula, people-wise. Like, is that?
I don't know whether it's. Am I all right to just jump in there, or shall I wait till the end of your question?
Go for it.
I don't know whether it's a formula. It's just that, and maybe it's, it could be a benefit of getting older. Because I do think that if you're any good at something, you get better as you get older. You get further into it. I think it's an idiot notion, the idea that your best stuff is, your early stuff. Although it may be true if you've only got a limited amount to say. But I never went with the idea that this kind of, if you like, my ethos has always been like the opposite of like a fall ethos of, a revolving door. Because I can see how that's one way of kind of achieving, things staying fresh. But to me, it's not, and this is no disrespect to Mark E. Smith, but that's kind of like a director saying to an actor in a movie, you've got to look like you're walking into this scene that you've just been running, so just go and run around the block. It's like it's a bit. It's obviously going to work up to a point, but I think that you get more interesting results when you've got something more settled. So I wouldn't call that a formula, but yeah. I just think one of the great things about the Second City Liquor album is that by the time we eventually put it out, we'd really lived inside those songs and played them, and you know yourselves, as when you've been playing with people for a certain time, it's almost like the equivalent of someone on, someone on the right side of the park, football I'm talking here, not having to bother to look up to know that if they're playing the ball to the left side of the park, that someone's going to be running onto it. You just have that kind of affinity that you develop. And I think that's a lot more interesting than just having people coming in and going out all the time. That to me is just like sort of, just having a kind of, one night stand after one night stand after one night stand. It's sort of ultimately, if you want something with any depth, it's uninteresting. It's not. It's only going to go so far, I think. Past trauma.
I was going to say, I think all of our lineup changes were purely down to necessity rather than anything else. People moving on to do other things, and rather than wanting to start something different creatively, or get some different inspiration in. But
Paul, have you, in terms of lineup changes, how's that worked for you? Like in terms of, does it?
It changes everything. I think.
No, I mean, do you sit down and have discussions about it, or is it kind of how is your group kind of, if you like, led, or is it does it work kind of?
Well, we have the songs. That's the songs are the kicking off point, but how they're interpreted is entirely down to the people that are playing them. So one lineup of the band would play a song totally different to another one. Like when we had Mish on drums, it was very loose and could change quite a lot. Whereas now with Dickie, the current drummer, it's pretty, what you're going to get every time.
I suppose it's going to some extent change the way you write, isn't it? Because
it does,
you know who's going to be delivering it.
Exactly, yeah. When it first started, it was just me and a drum machine. Then the song would be completed before I played it to anybody else. All the parts would be written. Whereas now I'll just get my bits done, and then let the others write the bass lines and the bits and pieces.
How does it work for you, Greg?
It depends which band or project I'm working with at any given point. So say Modern Literature, to start with, I had a set of songs that I wanted to put instrumentation to. But then as that progressed, it became more of a collaborative effort. But there's still a lot of me going away, writing parts, finding little snippets of lyrics that suit little phrases and then expanding. Whereas I've just started a thing with Becky from DDD where it's just guitar and drums. So we literally turn up to the studio, scull a load of beer, write 5-6 songs in a couple of hours and just get on with it. No real thought process at all, to be perfectly honest. It's great fun, just open chords, really obvious lyrics, shouting against anything we feel like shouting against or for. That's like my fun band at the minute. Whereas
like stuff that you write down all the time, basically. I mean, I've got a folder on my phone that's just got words and sentences and just shit like that in it. I wake up in the night and scribble stuff down. But
does that Ed in who I can't remember Ed's surname, but he used to be in Mills and Boon.
The
band Mills and Boon, not the books. We can talk about the Mills and Boon books as well, but yeah, Ed in Mills and Boon always used to say, I forget what he called it. He said, is it kind of like a little devil in on your back or on your shoulder, that when you're lying there and you just drifting off into sleep, you have that line or that melody or that riff or something that comes to you, and there's that little devil says, I'll be all right, just get it down in the morning. But it never happens, does it? It's always gone. You have to get up and, like you say, punch it into your phone. But I don't know how it works for you. I end up with loads of kind of bits of stuff, of things that I'm kind of, I try and sort of shoehorn them into things, but most of them won't go because they just kind of stick out like the sore thumb, and it just doesn't work. So I mean, you probably find this as well, Paul, just when you got a family and kids and stuff, it's that those time frames, not so much the actual amount of time that you spend on things, but how you work those time frames becomes really important, because sometimes in terms of what I think you're saying, Greg, it's the sort of sanctity of, first take, best take, and sometimes you can just block off half an hour or an hour and get something down that's so pure that's it does it. Whereas you could spend all day trying to get the same thing and completely fail.
Mm.
So it's I don't know what I'm saying. It's a really hard thing to explain, isn't it? It's just that sort of that working process. And I suppose, I mean, I don't know how it's worked for you two, but lockdown, it's been a bit of a strange one, hasn't it? Because before you two comment on this, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, with the courtesy group, we've done more in terms of videos and things like that. Although that's mainly been Hide, but we've kind of, I suppose we've each sent him stuff and inputted a bit, but it's been him that's been kind of coordinating that. But in terms of writing, I think we've all just been doing that separately. We haven't got to the stage of trying to kind of finish something without physically being there in the same space. So, I mean, I'm always writing all the time and the others are, but how that's going to find itself in terms of the next, like the third album or whatever, I don't know.
We were talking about this the other day about how when things are doable again, like next year or whatever, and people start creating together again and performing again, I feel like there's going to be a big kind of explosion of new inspiration and new ideas and people getting enthusiastic about stuff again, the performing arts and music and in general, basically.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of hopeful.
I think that the need to kind of see live performance is so basic that it's a bit like those conversations when, like when e-books and such like started coming out and people were seriously saying, a physical book, people are not going to want to read actual books. And I think people are always going to want to go and see live gigs. And I think you're right, Paul. It's hard to see how big a thing that will be, but it will seem completely brand new. But then, how many venues are still going to be?
This is the problem. It's going to be surviving for the next year in stasis, kind of, and then whatever's still around and capable of opening will reap the best.
There's also the cynic in me that thinks we already live in a very oversaturated marketplace of questionable quality and content on occasion. So how many fucking pricks with ukuleles are going to be demanding fucking gigs after all of this? You know what I mean? It's just going to be, oh, God.
In terms of the kind of stuff that we're doing, I think it's going to be those early gigs they're going to be massive because it already feels to me like just going back to last March, that feels like about 3 years ago. So by the time we're playing again, it's going to feel like you haven't done a gig for about 5 years.
Forever.
Then again, plus side is to be our ages and a matter of months to feel like over a year. It's pretty fucking good, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's rather than just flying by till you hit the grave, you know what I mean? It's maybe a pause or a change is as good as a rest to a degree. It's all fucking frustrating, but sometimes hitting the reset button, it's just venues, freelancers, people who we work with at gigs and the people who are so important for putting gigs on. They're the people I'm worried for.
This is what we were trying to work out the other day, is how would a socially distanced courtesy group gig work?
Well, yeah, it's almost like...
That would be impossible.
It is impossible, and in a way it's...
Tie you in one place or something.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I suppose, I really enjoy doing Verbalist. I love it, and I love having to sort of... I didn't know whether it would be possible to keep sort of doing something weekly, and a few people said to you, you're going to manage to sort of keep doing that, because that's quite a lot to take on, and I just go from one to t'other at the moment, and it just keeps going. And obviously with that, I'm kind of pinned to the spot a bit like now, and it doesn't bother me really, but I do kind of It's not a gig. Do you know what I mean? And I do. Yeah, I wonder with courtesy group how that would work because I don't know. It's just it's not really part of the beast that is.
Yeah, the like with modern literature, we played at the Dark Horse in Moseley,
Yeah,
along with Pete from Sunshine Frisbee Laserbeam, and that was a socially distanced gig where the audience were all seated. I think there were about 45, 50 people in the room, but seated in blocks of 2 here or 5 there, because it was the rule of 6, I think, at that point. Correct me
yeah.
if I'm wrong, like, but yeah, it was weird, but people were getting into it whilst having to sit there and not really be cheering or whatever, but it doesn't affect us because we're not used to people cheering. But you know, it was weird, but it was quite liberating in a way because it felt like people were really having to fucking concentrate on what was going on.
I mean, I suppose you're not going to get that thing so much of people just kind of, like when people are acting like dicks at gigs and just getting their phone out and kind of just you're thinking, well, why have you bothered to turn up to it? Because you're just acting like you just sat on your settee and you're in your yard. It's just like, forget it, go home. So I'm guessing that you do get more concentration from people, but is that true?
This one was a bit of a novelty, I think, 'cause it was the first live music. We were on first, so we were the first band that a lot of people had seen in months. So I think that novelty factor kind of helped because people were just like, fucking hell, I remember this sort of thing. Maybe played slightly better and sung a bit more in tune, but I remember it. And it was a really nice communal vibe in the room. And then my favourite bit, ironically, was sitting down watching Pete and Tom play and just sat there, beer constantly appearing because it was table service. So I didn't have to queue at the bar and then miss a song. I just sat there with my beer constantly being refilled. It was like, yeah, this is perfect. This is like musical
Greg, you make
Valhalla.
it sound like one of those sort of Brothers Grimm stories where you're travelling through distant lands and you stop and wipe your brow and there's a pint of beer there, but you want a tree stump and you, oh, no.
But yeah,
I think
it is what it is.
Could be one of the best things to come out of this, to be honest.
Yeah.
No more queuing at the bar. That would be perfect for me.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Tell you what, Al, here's a question for you. Speaking of shitty audiences.
Yeah.
Did, a few years back, the Courtesy Group or yourself solo support John Cooper Clarke at the Institute in one of the upstairs rooms?
Yeah. I'll tell you about that gig.
I was at that gig.
Yeah.
And
go on.
Do you remember there being a couple at the back of the room who were like chatting shit to each other? And then it was either when you were on stage or when John Cooper Clarke was on stage, and whoever was on stage, because I was quite pissed at this. I wasn't one of the couple, by the way. I'll just get that out there. But I remember someone kicking them out and it kicked off. There was a bit of a fight at the back of the room.
Yeah, I do remember that there was a sort of pocket at the back where people were just like not engaging in the gig at all, and that sort of stayed constant throughout the night. But it was a really funny gig because it was one of those gigs, when you have a gig where everything's really nice beforehand and like you kind of you're looked after by the promoter and everything's really cool, but maybe like the gig's not so hot, and then you have the opposite where it happens very rarely, but just occasionally. But you have that more often kind of experience where it's really shitty before you actually get to play. But the gig itself is fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
And that John Cooper Clarke gig was like that because we were kind of lugging all the stuff, like obviously, with the 2 bass rigs, and it was just him on. So we were bringing everything. And we were carting stuff up to that top floor, and there was that lift there, but it was only kind of like wheelchair access. So we were kind of lugging everything up, like all those flights of stairs, and everything just seemed to go wrong. Like the promoter kind of basically stiffed us. But then after a certain point, everything just went swimmingly. Like when John overheard that, he just put his hand in his pockets and goes, "Well, I can't be having that. I can't be having the courtesy group treated like that." He just put his hand in his pocket and just pulled out a load of notes, and it was fucking great after a certain point, because from our perspective the gig was great, he was great, and it was just a top night. But it was just like really shitty until we got to that point. But I think that's the only time I've ever played the Institute. So I didn't know you at that point, presumably. Then
I think probably not. I think I'd seen the courtesy group play a few times. I knew Fife quite well back then, like back when he was in Senseless Prayer. Yeah. But I was at that. I got tickets bought for my birthday, and I was like, "Yep, sound. I'll go to that." If I'd have been aware enough and sort of conscious enough to actually bother to look at gig listings ever at that point in my life, I probably would have gone anyway. But I was at a stage where I sort of muddled through the days in a bit of a fug. So people telling me something was on or buy me a ticket for something was probably the only way I was going to make it to anything in an organised manner. But I just remember it being fucking amazing. But then, there was this couple at the back who were chatting, having a bit of a row and then chatting. And then, like, this other bloke just stepped in and just said, "Shut the fuck up or get out." From what I remember, it was along those lines. And it kicked off a bit. There was a little scuffle at the back of the room. And I can't remember whose set it was in, because I was sort of on my way to being smashed myself, but just in awe of what was going on, especially when the courtesy group were on, goes without saying. But then when John was on, just like hanging off every word, because it's just got its own backing track without you having to hear it, sort of thing, because of the rhythm and stanza. But just these tricks at the back kicking off. And I can't remember if someone on stage said something before it kicked off, or it's just someone in the audience just sort of took a dig and then got them thrown out. But it's quite fun.
I know what you mean about sort of hanging on, because I think the way that John kind of works his words is and this was like a big impact on me, because I suddenly realised that the first time I saw him on that, it was a punk thing TV compilation called The Way We Were. Sort of back end of sort of late 80s, and it was like everyone was on it. Like the Pistols were on it, from the kind of very famous punk bands to sort of like kind of not at all famous. And it was that way that he kind of really savoured and relished every single word. Like every word had its own kind of texture and flavour, and so that happening in a live capacity, you can't have that. It's just it's unpardonable, isn't it? Really. I think he's one of those people that I listened to a program that he did. Trying to think what it's called. It's one of those regular programs on, I think it's Radio 4. It might even be Radio 3, where if you're the guest, you have to pick like a hero. John Cooper Clarke had picked Elvis. He told me he picked Elvis originally, but Elvis had been picked before. So he had Salvador Dali, and they had on the program they'll have all these expert guests. So they had all these kind of people who'd written books about Dali, or kind of museum curators, professors, what have you. And he was just running rings around all of them, just because his take was so much more original. He's just got that sort of, you get in it. Oftentimes in institutions, you get people that are there, but their thinking is very sort of, it's so orthodox, and where he's coming from it's just such a unique and personal approach that what he's got to say about anything, whether it's pickles or whatever, or Dali, it's going to be interesting, because he's going to have his own take on it, which is what you want, isn't it?
It's that thing of humanism versus academic thought, isn't it? At the end of the day, you know, you can research something, you can read up on something, you can experience something secondary or tertiary,
passion, isn't it?
but you're not actually
What's that?
experiencing that thing.
It's about the passion. It's not about the analysis. It's about the feelings that it evokes. That raw kind of, you know.
I want to see Darley in the wild humping and smacking Breton round the head, not in a zoo, whilst Georges Bataille writes an essay on him.
You could have a kind of treatise on how things were supposed to go, and even kind of Svengalis and people within music try and construct that. But it's always just chaos, isn't it? In the best sense.
There's no formula for sure.
There's no formula. So I mean, I've got mixed. I don't know what you two. I've got mixed feelings about the fact that there's so much available to know about the past in terms of musical history, because I think a lot of that, it becomes a sort of a bit of a boring kind of nostalgic thing, especially when it comes down to punk.
It's going to be interesting to see how the next generation turns out, I think, because teenagers now are exposed to so much at the flick of a button. You know, they can hear any music they want. Oh, you like this? Try this. If you like that, try this. When you had to get on the bus and go to town and order a record and wait a month, there's loads of stuff that I didn't hear until I was, you know, in my late 20s or whatever, that became really important to me. And if I'd had that for an extra 10 years, how would that have changed what shaped me? I don't know.
Don't you think the waiting is a big part of it? I think boredom's a massive part of anything like truly creative, because what we have now is a culture that is all about the opposite, as in sort of it's about everything being instantly available. But that kind of thins everything out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because boredom, I suppose, gives a certain sort of depth and solidity to something. So if you're waiting to hear something, I remember my mate Pete telling me about ordering, being a big Lou Reed fan. This is before the Au Pairs. This is Pete Hammond, who was the drummer in the Au Pairs. And he's a big Lou Reed fan, and you know, as a teenager, he'd ordered Metal Machine music, and he sat there in his house in Northfield and kind of waiting for it to arrive, and it takes like 3 fucking weeks or 4 weeks to arrive, and then sitting in a darkened room and listening to the whole thing and thinking, well, what the fuck is, wondering what to make of it at the age of 14 or 13 or whatever. But I mean, I had the same thing. I don't know how it was for you. I had the same thing with people like Link Ray. It was. I heard him described and name dropped by so many people before I actually heard him. And the first time I heard him was just weirdly. I'd gone down to Brighton to see Blues play at the Goldstone Ground, and but also because there was an exhibition of paintings by the Captain by Don Van Vliet in Brighton. So I had a dual purpose there. I don't think there was a big percentage of Birmingham City fans, apart from myself, that fell into that little quotient. But I ended up in this pub called the Hand in Heart, I think, and there's a jukebox in there, and it had Rumble on it, and I just played it. Must have played it about 50 times, because it's only about 2 minutes long. I just played it over and over and over again. I was just so amazed to just find it after kind of hearing about this character and reading about him and kind of hearing that he had one lung because the other one had been shot off in the Korean War and stuff like this. And I think that applies to loads of things. I remember before I saw Apocalypse Now, kind of imagining by the descriptions that I read what it was going to be like, and I think all of that's really important. But I don't know, as you say, how we're gonna, because kids that are growing up are being born into a totally separate, a totally different culture. So how do they, in terms of the new music that 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds are going to produce, how do they attack that?
It's weird. I mean, I'd probably get like 2 or 3 records for my birthday or Christmas, whatever, and then for the next 6 months, because my birthday's in June, so
Yeah.
just have those 2 or 3 records that I'd be listening to for 6 months, and they
Yeah.
would become part of me, and get another 2 or 3 the next 6 months. If you're just listening to something once and then, right, what's next? Are you ever gonna get that connection again? I don't know.
Is there an argument to say that a certain element of tribalism is actually lost now? So you don't have goths and punks and rockers and mods. You just have kids who can pick and choose from this whole plethora of influence, which is a good thing to an extent. Well, it's very healthy. But at the same time, I remember being a kid going out in Birmingham to Edwards number 8 when I was like, 14, 15. And
deciding which floor you wanted to go to.
well, yeah, and just like getting really into metal, and then going to Snobs and getting into like mod stuff and Red Balloon and clubs like that. And you sort of experience all it, but a lot of people would just be very closed-minded. I'm a rocker, I'm a mod, I'm a punk, I'm a this, I'm a that. Whereas I'd just choose the bits I liked from all of these different scenes.
Best way to be, though, isn't it?
And
I think.
I used to be constantly going up and down stairs in Edwards, like start the goth floor, goth and kind of new wave, then go downstairs, dance to a bit of alternative stuff, then back upstairs again. I saw more of the stairs than anything, I think.
More stairs than Fields of the Nephilim records.
I think. I mean, it was weird actually, because when because I got an email from this chap Jim Crace the other day, who's a novelist, and he sent me this long, real kind of like a review of Second City Liquor, and it made me laugh because he said, "I love CDs." And people normally slag CDs off and say, CDs are nothing compared to vinyl, but the point he was making was that the way we consume music is all about just skipping from one thing to another. So there's that sort of lack of depth, that there's something about a CD or a record that's kind of more like a book, as in you have to kind of live with it a bit. If you read a book that's 180 pages, you've still got to live with that a bit. And if you read, bloody, a Dostoevsky novel or something, you're going to be living with it for a lot longer. And there's something to be said for that, I think, in the same way that there's something to be said for the kind of the waiting out on something that you're pursuing and want to hear. Or even in terms of gigs, kind of traveling from one end of the country to the other. I mean, you mentioned Fife, Greg. Fife got me into Young Fathers. Young Fathers.
Yeah.
And this was quite recently. So I mean, the Guillemots had their sort of moment and whatever. But he was really passionate about what they were doing, and he used to jump on trains and go and see them in, 50 miles away or whatever. When before they were kind of had any, anyone knew who they were, and that's a big part of it. It is a tribal thing, a little bit like going and watch your team in another town, another city, I think.
Do you think being a blues fan prepares you for a life of being in a band you see as amazing, but maybe wins a League Cup once in your lifetime,
and then being relegated?
Precisely.
It's certainly a good grounding, isn't it? I think. Yeah, I think that's a good analogy, Greg. I think it's good that the preparation that following your local team gives you into music, because you get to the stage we are, and your thoughts of kind of world domination, if you ever had any, aren't really the same, are they?
No, I'd take league. National League playoffs would do me, mate. The Vanarama.
I just want to be on Spa Radio. That's my dream.
I mean, I know Greg still hankers for world domination.
Yeah, but that's a very different kind of world domination, isn't it? It's a totalitarian regime I'm setting up on the sly. A very socialist one, without the gulags, may I add. Well,
You make it sound
certain.
like it's like it's a bit of relish on
Yes,
it's like a side order.
would Sir care for a side order of gulag with his 50 ruble bread? But yeah, I don't know. For me, it's a weird one because the way I got into music originally was I was in the school playground at junior school, and it was the day they were giving out all the brass instruments, and I got too nervous to go and ask for one or to go and audition. Or how do you audition a 7-year-old on a brass instrument? They're going to sound shit anyway, regardless. But I didn't go. And then I was in the playground at lunchtime, kicking a tennis ball about with my mates. And this teacher, I remember her name, Mrs. Gaunt, came up to me, went, "Oi, Greg Smith, you've got long arms. We've got a trombone left. You playing it?" And
I do think, I don't know why this is a point of wrapping, a good wrapping up point. But I said this to Johnny Clark, and he said definitely I agree with you. But when I was growing up and kind of Elvis Costello was around, there was a certain type of person who would refer to him as Elvis, and it was with that kind of like, there was a certain way that was said, and I always just thought anyone that did that, wanker. You know what I mean? It's like that's like, you know, I said that to John. I said that's the definition of a wanker, isn't it? Really, someone who he was like, definitely, you know, always thought of that every time. Yeah.
So listening to Second City Liquor, there seems to be quite a lot of commentary on a possible lost or misspent youth or certain situations that may have arisen. I was just wondering, are they autobiographical, or are they more character studies, or are they a kind of blend of the two?
I think the idea of me sitting down and writing song by song, writing an autobiographical, sort of chucking my diaries at a load of music. I think, apart from the fact that I loathe the idea of that, no matter who's doing it, but I think, for the others, that would just be, it'd be a bit sort of vainglorious on my part, and I don't think the result would be good. I tend to sort of always try and write from a character perspective, but with the thinking that no matter what perspective you kind of nominate to write from, inevitably your own experience is going to bleed into that. So for me, that always works better than trying to sit down and write from your own experience. I mean, occasionally I've tried to do that just to see what happens. I tried to do it the other day with a poem, but I just kind of abandoned it in the end. And I think, I can't speak for other people, but for me, I just think it's, I just don't think I'm an endlessly kind of fascinating individual in terms of the life I've led. I think I'm just a pretty ordinary sort of fella, but I love kind of getting into a kind of state where I feel like I'm connecting to something that is, I was going to say outside of myself, but that sounds all crappy and like I'm going onto some kind of astral plane. I just mean, really, I'm just talking about using my imagination and sort of, it's a bit like when I was a kid, I used to watch Dave Allen with my dad, and he used to say that, and it's probably the Celtic in me, that if you ask an Irishman directions, he'd say, well, I wouldn't start from here if I was you. I'd go over there, it's nearer. It's a little bit like that, really. I think in terms of writing, that if you start from somewhere else, you kind of, it just it's nearer.
Yeah, because
Does that answer your question?
To a degree, yeah. Because
what were you thinking of in terms of Second City? What prompted that question?
There's a lot of allusions to the rock, be it Alan Rock, or one would assume a crack rock. And I was wondering, because say there's the lyric in Hickory Bay State, there's in on the rock, in the rock, etc. And there's certain because I listened to the album a few times yesterday in preparation for this, and there are certain bits of wordplay that sound quite close to the bone, but also sound like they could be written about observations rather than lived experience. And I was just wondering, just out of sheer bloody interest myself, where that line lay. Was it an amalgamation of the two, or was it simply one or the other?
Well, I mean, In the Rock on the Rock came from something that Dave Cochran said. And I think we were talking about the Rock pub in Alum Rock, and it was that idea about the story was people, which I've said sometimes, it gives people smoking rocks in the bogs of the Rock in Alum Rock. I think he said In the Rock on the Rock, and we had a laugh, and I said, I think he might have even said, "Oh, it's a good line, that, isn't it?" And I looked at him, I said, "Yeah, it is. I'll use that for something." He went, "No, I was only joking." And I looked at him, I thought, it's good though. In the Rock on the Rock. It's like, and we wrote that with that's so old, that song. We actually wrote that with Fife, and I remember when we were writing it, Fife wasn't convinced at first, but that kind of, it was so kind of, on one level musically, it was so dumb, which is obviously what makes it really heavy and good. But that's kind of where that came from, really. And then Heckery, there is a lot of wordplay in what I do, because that's what I like to do, and I kind of always feel a bit shortchanged that poets don't do that more, because I always think that so if you go and watch a football match, you're not paying to watch someone just boot the ball into the stands. You want to see something that's kind of a bit more playful and a bit more entertaining. And I'm always surprised that it only seems to me a small percentage of poets that actually seem interested in just playing with language. It's almost more, you get it more comedically. You get people like Vivian Stanchel and Clark, obviously. But you get people like Dylan Thomas and Gerard Manley Hopkins and poets like that who start kind of coining words, and obviously Shakespeare did it massively, but in general it doesn't seem to happen. So it's something that I just like doing it. I just dig doing that. And in terms of misspent youth, lost youth, I think doesn't everyone feel that? I think it's a more common feeling to feel that you've that you failed in things than that you're a kind of one rip-roaring success story, unless you kind of got a real big kind of ego. I think most people can relate to that more. Yeah, and I think in terms of the sort of that kind of brummy flavour, which is definitely something that I wanted for the album. I wanted it to feel. That's why you've got all those kind of segues, which are things that I sent to Hide, or he put in some of his own. It's that idea of it being not in a documentary sense, but it kind of. I don't really like that word psychogeography, but it's kind of more in that vein. It's more of a kind of like a landscape of the mind that could be reflective of that. And I think that Birmingham and the West Midlands as a region, it's always a kind of it's always the butt end of the joke, and the kind of it's always the underdog, isn't it? It's not, and I think that sort of probably that self-deprecating sense that we have about ourselves is probably our greatest strength, and also might be our sort of undoing as well, possibly also.
Yeah, like a melting pot and a laughing stock. If we were Manx,
I like that. you gotta use that for a lyric, Greg. That's good.
Yeah, man. I'll just jot it down here.
Write it down, because you won't remember it, and you'll message me and say, what was it I said? And I said, I can't remember, Greg. You said it. In terms of modern literature, because obviously you've been doing music for a long time. I suppose I'm interested in how you see modern literature going, because that's still quite a young project.
I think before lockdown, obviously, we got the EP out, and that was like the first spate of songs, and they had that new car smell, and you're all enthusiastic, and then writing more stuff eventually gets a little bit more procrastinated, a little bit, so it's taken a bit more time to build up a few more tunes. However, we're sort of 3/4 of the way through writing an album at the minute, and the sort of long plan, once all of this nonsense has rescinded and we're all vaccinated, is to go and record the best album we can. It's going to mean writing more songs than we need and probably recording more songs than we need and seeing what fits together. When we started modern literature, the idea was I wouldn't play an instrument. I was living out my Al Hutchins fantasies, basically, of just wanting to be able to run around the room with a double wrap mic lead and garrote a few people. I was really looking forward to that. But unfortunately, some of the songs sound better with keys or an extra guitar. But I guess long term, it'd be nice to have someone else in playing that instrumentation, who might be just a live member or whatever. So the idea, again, initially there was a concept, and it was to be like a Poundland Nick Cave, someone who like when Nick Cave left the birthday party, or the birthday party disintegrated and he went off to do the bad seeds. Imagine if he'd only played in working men's clubs instead. And that was the kind of idea, to kind of latch onto that, but do it in quite a, we're all going to wear suits and we wear the same suit every gig until it just falls apart, sort of thing. And I'm still doing that. The rest of them change their clothes because they're fucking lightweights. But it's still an evolving idea as well, modern literature, because some of the stuff we've written recently has gone a bit more of a bit less atmospheric and a bit more sort of mathy and riffy, and some of it's gone a bit sort of Fugazi-ish hardcore sort of places.
I've always seen out of anyone, if I was and obviously people see different things, but when I hear your stuff, not just modern literature, but I've always seen more of a sort of Joy Division thing in terms of influence. I don't know whether that's true, because people see what they see.
Oh yeah, we absolutely ape Joy Division to the point that our set ender is actually called Closer, which is spelt the same as Closer. So, it's... and that's because we're shit at thinking of names. But there is a Joy Division influence. I love Joy Division, and I think you draw from what you love. And if you don't do that and you can't accept that, you're being disingenuous, because what makes you want to pick up a guitar or a microphone in the first place? You've heard something that's inspired you to do that. And anyone who goes, well, I don't have any influences because I'm far too fucking cool for that, is a twat.
But don't I agree with you, because you've got to start from somewhere. But don't you think that I don't know why saying don't you think makes it summons up Jeremy Paxman, doesn't it? Or maybe a Chris Morris Jeremy Paxman. Don't you think?
No, I don't.
No, don't you think? Don't you think that?
Fucking hell, lad.
Fucking hell, Greg. Don't you think that having started from those places, Joy Division or whatever, or Captain Beefheart, it might be Fugazi, that you take those influences and you put them together, and very gradually and very strangely over time they metamorphose into something that has its own kind of life. And you have added something new. You added something new, Greg, to the table. That is the banquet of modern alternative music. And it's at that point that you invite all your guests in, making sure that they know the secret password and the ticketing system is in place. The tickets being in themselves rare and exotic fruits, some of which you may not have heard of or even be able to spell.
Well, one thing I'm very aware of is I also find that if I could breathe some life back into Ian Curtis, that would be a very wondrous thing, because the poor fellow just didn't know if he was coming or going with Belgium and Salford and Macclesfield and Mansfield and wherever.
He just needed the bloody oven gloves. He needed those oven gloves. He needed more pies, more Fray Bentos.
Oh, I'll tell you what.
My question for you, Paul, was I wanted to know a little bit more about the recent recording experience and how that kind of played out, because obviously you were doing it at an odd kind of point, I suppose. So what was that experience of recording like? The studio being of course an extra an extra instrument, an extra tool. So tell me how you took things to the next level, and what we're going to hear once we can hourly connect with the sonics therein.
Well,
everybody loves Owl.
It seems kind of weird now, doesn't it, to be able to go away to a studio and actually do something like that with other people that don't live in your house. It's I mean, we wrote all the songs in the first lockdown. Like Greg said, we had more songs than we needed. We picked the best ones. We actually went to the trouble of doing the track listing before we went into the studio, so we knew what we were recording and how we wanted it to flow. And we went to Wales, which was a rare thing to do in the last year. It was like the 1 month that we could have done it last year, probably, between lockdowns and everything. And we went for 3 days and we did it. We took Jim from Wolverhampton again to do the production, who also produced the Modern Literature EP. And what can you expect? It has acquired a concept over its evolution, really. It's kind of a journey musically. It's not just the noise rock that we've been doing. There's even a ballad on there, so it's
I'm intrigued by the fact that you had the track listing, as in the sequencing of that. Just like, wow, I mean, because we could never kind of reach that point before going into the studio. So did that change at all, or has that changed so far?
It didn't. I mean, some of the songs, when I first wrote them, and I thought this is going to be the opening track kind of thing, and then it turned out that it wasn't. But once we'd got that track listing sorted, and that was mostly down to Mike, the bass player, and he did most of the structuring of it, and it just flows really nicely.
Have you got a time scale on this, or is it difficult to say in the...
It'll be out at the end of April, and there's a single out next week. Once the lockdown's over and we can get back into Mothers, we'll get this gig back on. Yeah,
brilliant. I'm looking forward to that. That was not a surprising blow, but a blow nonetheless, really.
I was just to take it back, because I always love playing when Fauxchisels play with you guys, because it takes me back to the first time I met you was when we played with you at the Sunflower Lounge.
Yeah, that's
right. Supporting Zunzunny Gooey, I think.
I think so. Yeah. That was a great night, wasn't it?
That was when we had Mish on drums still, I think.
And to be honest, Mish is kind of it's funny because we kind of she sort of came into the world of the band and then disappeared, and then I'll just bump into her at places. Like I did this poetry gig in Stourbridge about a year. It seems like years ago. It was back end of last February, and it's probably hand on heart, it's probably the best poetry gig I've ever done, and she just kind of rocked up at that gig. So for me, she's been like a kind of talisman of kind of real, just bringing good vibes and interesting sort of creative ideas to the fore. So nice one. Well, are we
cool?
That's good.
Nice.
Enjoyed that.
Even got your gloves in, Greg. It's almost Almost like you'd planned it.
Yeah, it's just before Christmas. Alice said, "Oh, I need some new oven gloves," and all I could hear in my head was Joy Division oven gloves. So I bought us some.
It's a good.
And
I mean, I do wonder how. I mean, how do you think? What's his name? Nigel Blackwell. How do you think he? I've got these kind of fantasies that he probably has got a day job. He probably goes around all the the pub
primary
quiz
schools.
machines and kind of he's got because I find it hard to believe that he can survive just doing half man half biscuit.
You'd think that, but at the same time, it's
Maybe
not like Radio 6 don't play him to death, given half a chance on occasion. They probably pull in a tenner a month. So, who can't live off that in this day and age?
how many tins of beans can you get for a tenner? Especially if you go back to the 1990s when they went down to 3p at Aldi.
Oh,
Stratford
mate,
Road.
you want to go to Farm Foods?
Well, yeah,
1p.
that's why I mentioned it. Yeah. Farm foods or heron.
Heron. Oh,
Heron.
good God, yes.
Heron, man.
Ah,
Yeah.
and again, bacon shoes.
Bacon shoes. Yeah, you need to check in with Saul, I think. This is going to the Mills and Boone kind of pork and meat end of the park that
Oh no, Bacon's shoes, the shoe shop, Bacon's, which
okay.
used to exist. And it was very much the farm foods of the shoe world. It was no starch right by Clark's.
I was going down the bacon shoes route as well, I'm afraid.
Yeah, me and Paul have completely visualised these kind of bacon shoes in a sort of
Streaky or back though, streaky or back.
I was going streaky.
Yeah.
It was it was more frightening because the rest of the visualizing was quite just sort of gritty everyday stuff, and then there was this sort of like this detail became more kind of horrendous and frightening as a result of that. Wasn't like everything went mad and everyone was covered in custard and sort of a tear falling from someone's face just started rolling along the road laughing and kind of falling about. It was very controlled, but it's just that detail was.
I was seeing them as kind of Jesus sandals.
It's all about fish, isn't it, with Jesus? Fish and loaves, but what bacon does not get a kind of a healthy kind of egalitarian looking, I find. You're just thinking bacon butties. It's just going to be, it's a whole lot simpler logistically.
I know, yeah, like 5,000 fish. Like, who's got time to fry that? Just 5,000 bacon butties, you could probably get away with like 15 saucepans, flipping them on a high heat, nice and quick.
They could all be ready. It's like work and non-work. Think about it. You've got the cling film there. It's all ready. All you're doing is handing stuff over. It's
you need to miracle smarter, not harder.
On that note,
right.
So what's that song that you're going to go away and write that you wrote that you did write down the earlier
melting pot and a laughing stock.
The Birmingham scene, if you understand me, it's far more splintered, and I actually think that it's that splendid isolation that enables a certain kind of creativity. You know what I'm saying, Cock? So sometimes because we're not so cosmopolitan in the way that London or perhaps even Manchester is, and everything's sort of splintered and separate and apart, that from that isolation, from that boredom and frustration even, that greater things can come. So we get all these different kind of artists that have got nothing to do with each other but are in themselves totally unique. You understand me? So you've got like broadcast, but you've also got Black Sabbath or Dexys or Fauxchisels or Modern Literature or the Courtesy Group or just millions of different the Au Pairs or the Beat or whatever, but there isn't really anything that joins them up.
It's
a city of 1,000 trades. That's what it is.
There's your ending point.
Just don't fucking talk to me about canals or I'll throw you in one, because we haven't got more canals than Venice. You talk about having more canals than Venice. Like, I mean, because when you say canals to people, you just think of what's been chucked in them, don't you? Really. So, do you want to summon that image about the the place that you're from, or
I like the
where are
idea
you
of
reside?
Venice just having a couple of Futrals enemies and 3 co-op trolleys just floating by a gondola. That makes me happy. And we
I
should
just
do a
think we don't
cultural
look now, and
exchange. Yeah.
it just
Yeah,
gets
well,
it gets a bit dark.